Hey everybody, how's it going? Aaron Rift here from NoDQ.com to give you my thoughts on the WWE B-PPV events from 2010. Let's get started here. The first pay-per-view, Elimination Chamber, on the road to WrestleMania 26. I felt that this show was not quite as strong as the previous two No Way Out pay-per-views from 2008 and 2009, which featured the dual Elimination Chamber matches. The big story of the WWE title Elimination Chamber match was Randy Orton and Legacy. Randy Orton was in the process of turning face. He was having his issues with Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. DiBiase was in this match. You had Cody Rhodes come out and give Ted DiBiase a lead pipe, which DiBiase used on Orton, and that would set up their whole feud and their match at WrestleMania 26. Triple H ended up tapping out to John Cena in the end. John Cena retained the WWE title. This was the best part of the match, the final moments with Triple H and John Cena. But this was the problem with WWE being PG. They could not do as much in the Elimination Chamber matches as they were able to in the past. And it was more about the storylines going on than the actual carnage inside the chamber. Satan's structure, as WWE would call it. Post-match was more storyline. You had Vince McMahon coming out and announcing that John Cena would immediately be defending the WWE title against Dave Batista. Batista came out and quickly beat John Cena. It was very similar to when Edge cashed in Money in the Bank on Cena, only there was no briefcase here in this situation. Batista won the title, and that would set up Cena versus Batista at WrestleMania. The other big segment I wanted to mention was The Miz coming out and cutting a promo. I only mention this because this was the first time we heard Daniel Bryan's name mentioned on a WWE pay-per-view, and of course, all the insults at Bryan, portraying him as a nerd and all that stuff. Funny to look back on that and how things turned out. William Regal came out and talked about NXT, and the crowd was doing the what chants at Regal. So looking back, this was all very interesting to see how NXT would turn out and how Daniel Bryan would turn out. Miz ended up having a match with MVP and got busted open from a headbutt, I will note that, but beyond that, the rest of the card was fairly forgettable. We had the other Elimination Chamber match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Rey Mysterio did some cool stuff, doing the Spider-Man jump on the cage. You had the big finish where Shawn Michaels came out at the end when it was down to Jericho and Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels would super kick Undertaker to convince Undertaker to give him one more shot at the WrestleMania undefeated streak. And of course, Shawn Michaels would put his career on the line. One funny thing about this match was at one point, one of the pod doors got ripped open, and the referees literally had to hold up the pod, which I found to be very amusing. But yeah, overall this was a good pay-per-view, but I would not say it was as strong as No Way Out 2008 and 2009. Next up we have Extreme Rules, which was the pay-per-view after WrestleMania 26. It kicked off with an angle with Sheamus attacking Triple H backstage with a lead pipe. You had a tag team turmoil match, which was not that good. I've never been a fan of the tag team turmoil matches on pay-per-view. It goes by too quickly with teams getting eliminated after 2 or 3 minutes. It really does nothing to put any teams over. And in this case, the tag team titles were not even on the line in this match. So it was really just a segment to kill time on a pay-per-view. And that's not what you should be doing, especially back in those days when people are spending $45, $50 on a pay-per-view. You had a very good match between CM Punk and Rey Mysterio, with Mysterio's mask being on the line. I really enjoyed this CM Punk and Mysterio feud. I mean, it was very similar in a way to Rey Mysterio versus Chris Jericho from the previous year. They had a really entertaining feud with CM Punk trying to recruit Rey Mysterio into the Straight Edge Society. And in this match, Joey Mercury would show up as the newest member to help CM Punk defeat Mysterio. Then you had world champion, and I cannot believe I'm saying this now, Jack Swagger defending against Randy Orton. At least Swagger did get a win over Orton in this match, which I was surprised at even at the time, and especially now with how things turned out with Swagger. I just felt I would note that since, yes, at one time, Jack Swagger was the World Heavyweight Champion. You know, it's very easy to forget, but it did happen, believe it or not. Sheamus defeated the injured Triple H from earlier. Of course, Sheamus cannot just get a clean win over the aging star. Triple H had to get injured so Sheamus could get the cheap win. But whatever. Then you had Chris Jericho versus Edge for the world title in a steel cage match. I thought that this was a good cage match, but not a classic. I felt it did drag out a bit too long. You had Jericho kicking out of the spear. You had a super code breaker that Jericho hit on Edge, which Edge kicked out of, and I find that interesting because AJ Styles was not able to do so at WrestleMania 32. Eventually, Edge would hit another spear and retain the world title, so it was a good match overall. Then you had the main event, Last Man Standing, John Cena versus Batista. I thought that this was overall a great match. For a Last Man Standing match, I mean, this was really solid. They had lots of big spots. You had John Cena doing the AA on a steel chair. You had Batista spearing Cena twice. You had John Cena getting put through a table by Batista, which would cause Matt Striker to go, "Oh!" as he reacts for every big move. There was one funny moment when Batista responded to a fan. A fan yelled out, "I hate you, Batista." And Batista responded, "I hate you too." I thought that was funny. You had John Cena going through the barricade, AA through the announce table. I mean, these guys were just delivering one big move after big move. Spine buster through the table, Batista bomb. Batista eventually tapped out to the STF, but this was a last man standing match, so there were no tap outs. And John Cena at this point decided to use duct tape. This was the match with the infamous duct tape finish, with Cena taping Batista's legs to the post so Batista could not stand up for the 10 count. Really creative finish, I guess, but still, I think the problem with this was that it was not in line with John Cena's character. You know, John Cena's the guy who always wants to win decisively without any kind of controversy. You know, you might think another character like Edge might do something like this, not John Cena. So that was really the one big logic issue, and John Cena did go out the next night and say he would have to give Batista another match so they could have a decisive outcome. So yeah, it was a bit goofy, but I will say it was creative, and the match was a lot of fun. Next up, we have Over the Limit. Good opening match with Kofi Kingston and Drew McIntyre. They had an entertaining feud during this time with Teddy Long and Drew McIntyre having this friction back and forth, and Matt Hardy also getting involved, trying to get at Drew McIntyre. This was when Drew was really at his peak in WWE, I thought. He was really coming into his own as a heel, and the stuff he did with Kofi and Matt Hardy and Teddy Long, for that matter. Drew was really on fire at this point, but of course it would not last. You had a very bland, raw quality match with Ted DiBiase versus R-Truth. DiBiase was doing his father's gimmick, and the one highlight here, this is why I mention it, is we got to see Virgil. Virgil got some F money for this match, which was good for him. But other than that, very forgettable. And then we had CM Punk versus Rey Mysterio. Hair versus mask on the line. I thought that this was a great match. I really enjoyed the storyline, and I really enjoyed this match. CM Punk was bleeding right from the get-go in the head, and the doctor came out to try and seal up the wound, and of course the crowd booing. The crowd not a fan of the match being stopped due to blood, but it is what it is. The match was still really good. At one point, CM Punk threw Rey Mysterio like a dart into the barber chair. That was a cool spot. And it would go back and forth. And eventually, CM Punk would have the match won, but he would get too cocky, as a heel might tend to do. Rey Mysterio rolled him up and got the pinfall. After the match, the Straight Edge Society attacked Rey Mysterio, but Kane, of all people, made the save, and CM Punk ended up getting handcuffed by Rey Mysterio, and then they shaved CM Punk's hair. And the funny thing here was the fans yelling out, "Shave your chest," or "Shave his chest," which was a nice touch to that. CM Punk's reaction to getting his head shaved was great. I mean, really awesome stuff. I mean, this was just so well done. Hats off to WWE. Definitely a storyline and series of matches worth checking out. You had Randy Orton versus Edge. I was not a fan of this storyline. Basically, Edge just came to Raw during the draft and decided to just randomly turn heel and attack Randy Orton. That led up to this match, which could have been a good match, but Randy Orton was doing a thing where he pounds the mat, getting in position, coiling as the Viper does for his attack, and he ended up doing something to his shoulder, injuring it. It wasn't a serious injury because he was at the next pay-per-view, but it was enough of an injury that they had to improvise and do a double count-out finish, which was just a huge disappointment to the match. But injuries happen, and they can really happen at any time. I mean, that really goes to show you that injuries can happen just when a guy is out there doing something he does in every single match. You had Big Show versus Jack Swagger, and I really do not need to say anything about this match. I can just tell you, Big Show versus Jack Swagger, and you can shake your head at that. This match sucked, and of course Jack Swagger got DQ'd by using the belt, and Big Show beat up Swagger after the match. Really a complete waste of time, and Jack Swagger as world champion was not working, to say the least. Why they would do Swagger versus Big Show for the world title on a pay-per-view is beyond me. Then you had the main event, an I Quit match between Batista and John Cena. Good match, but I thought it was not quite as good as the Last Man Standing match. The referee saying over and over again, "You want to quit?" Batista passed out from the STF. Lots of big spots. Batista power slamming Cena through the announce table. Cena busted open during the match the hard way. Doctor coming out again, just like with CM Punk versus Mysterio. They ended up in the stands, and in a cool moment, actually one of the highlights of the match, Batista got knocked off the balcony and fell onto a bunch of plant security guards. That was a cool moment. Cena would not quit, of course. It is John Cena. That's the downside to the I Quit matches with John Cena. Cena's not quitting, so that kind of eliminates some of the drama. They did a spot where Cena hit the AA on top of a car, and actually what happened was Cena was going to hit the AA on the car, and at that point Batista decided, "I've taken up all this punishment. I've taken a lot of punishment throughout the match, but I cannot take an AA onto a car." And at that point Batista gave up. I should mention also, a few moments before, Batista tried to back the car into John Cena. So he attempted to murder John Cena on a live pay-per-view. So that was funny. But yeah, Batista quit because he did not want to get the AA on a car. And of course John Cena gave him the AA anyways, because Batista's a jerk. And this would be Batista's last WWE pay-per-view match until his infamous return at the 2014 Royal Rumble. And after the match, Sheamus would brogue kick Cena, and that would close the show. So overall, it was a very good pay-per-view. Extreme Rules delivered on this occasion, for the most part. Next up, we have Fatal 4-Way. Interesting pay-per-view. You had Vince coming out to start the pay-per-view off with a promo, basically talking about Nexus. This was coming off the hot Nexus angle where the group formed and laid out John Cena and destroyed the entire ring and ringside area. But of course Daniel Bryan got fired right after that angle because he choked out Justin Roberts with a necktie, and fans were not happy about this. They were not happy about Bryan getting fired over this. And during this promo, the fans were chanting Daniel Bryan. First match was Drew McIntyre against Kofi Kingston. Another good match between these guys, and more of the storyline between Teddy Long and Drew McIntyre, which I thought was very entertaining. Teddy Long ended up screwing Drew out of the match. We had Chris Jericho versus Evan Bourne. This was a great match. I mean, this was definitely one of Jericho's best pay-per-view matches of any era against anybody. This was as good as any Chris Jericho match. Definitely worth checking out. Evan Bourne won, but unfortunately he would not get a huge rub after this match. But at the time, it was a big deal to see an up-and-comer like Evan Bourne beating Chris Jericho. They showed a video of Undertaker and Kane, and Kane trying to find out the guy who put Undertaker in a vegetative state. This was a goofy storyline. Would eventually lead to more goofiness. This would also play a role in the World Heavyweight Championship match. You had a Fatal 4-Way because the pay-per-view was called Fatal 4-Way, which is really lame for a pay-per-view name. Fatal 4-Way. Spend $50 to see a bunch of Fatal 4-Way matches. Yeah, okay. Anyways, it was Big Show versus Mysterio versus CM Punk versus Jack Swagger. Mysterio got tons of boos in this match. Kane would come out trying to find out who put Undertaker in the vegetative state, and he was accusing CM Punk of being the guy, so he attacked Punk, and in the process, Mysterio was able to pin Jack Swagger to become the World Heavyweight Champion. Alright, one more match I wanted to take note of before the main event, the Usos versus the Hart Dynasty. I only mention this because I believe it was the Usos' first major pay-per-view match. I could be wrong on that though, but at least for the B pay-per-views it was. Then you had the main event, Fatal 4-Way, John Cena versus Randy Orton versus Edge versus Sheamus. This was decent, but nothing special. I think the problem here is that fans were expecting Nexus to interfere. They were shown backstage and the show was built around them and their invasion. And sure enough, Nexus came out, interfered, and during all the chaos and all the confusion, Sheamus rolled up John Cena to win the WWE title back and literally ran away from the building to escape from Nexus. And the show ended the same way it began, with fans chanting for Daniel Bryan. So even back in 2010, you had fans chanting for Bryan, even though he hadn't been with the company for that long. Next up, we have Money in the Bank 2010, the first Money in the Bank pay-per-view, which I thought was really good. The two Money in the Bank matches delivered. The SmackDown match was entertaining. You had one of the storylines being that Big Show was too big to be in a ladder match. Right in the beginning, Big Show tried climbing a ladder and he broke the ladder. So later on, he ended up bringing out his own giant-sized super ladder. Kofi Kingston did a cool boom drop off the top of the ladder through a table. He chose to do the cool spot instead of winning the match, which was funny. One thing that was annoying about this match was Matt Striker's commentary. I mean, almost every big move, Matt Striker would react with an "oh." I just found it to be annoying. And one of the announcers said that there was no giant in the history of the Money in the Bank match, which I guess Kane, being in the very first Money in the Bank match, did not count. So that was a botch there from the announcers. Kane would tip Big Show out of the ring, and Big Show would be buried in ladders. And then for the finish, Ziggler would be chokeslammed onto Big Show, who was buried in the ladders, and Kane would climb up and win the Money in the Bank ladder match. So that was definitely a surprise. I think a lot of people were not expecting Kane to win the Money in the Bank match. Next up, we had Rey Mysterio beating Jack Swagger to retain the world title. And as it turns out, Kane would come out, cash in Money in the Bank on Rey Mysterio, and win the world title. And that would basically set up a Kane heel turn to feud with Undertaker. First time in history also that somebody cashed in Money in the Bank on the same night that they won it. Then you had the Raw Money in the Bank match. John Morrison was one of the highlights, doing a lot of cool stuff, jumping from ladder to ladder. At one point, Edge trapped Morrison in the ladder. You had Evan Bourne doing a big bunch of cool stuff. You had 5 guys all trying to climb up the ladder at one time. Jericho getting his leg caught. A lot of different things we saw in this match. I mean, they were trying to be more innovative since this was the PG era, and they were also trying to be safer. They were trying to come up with some innovative spots, and they definitely did that in this match. Jericho got RKO'd off the ladder, and then Miz would end up knocking off Orton to climb the ladder and become the Money in the Bank briefcase holder. So yeah, overall this was a very entertaining show, largely due to the 2 Money in the Bank matches. You had John Cena and Sheamus in the main event of this Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Okay match, but once again, it was more about the storyline with the Nexus. Nexus coming out, and during the confusion, Sheamus is able to escape the cage and win. Night of Champions. A fairly forgettable WWE pay-per-view. Not much to it. It was in Chicago, so you had the good crowd, but not really that solid of a card. The opening match with Dolph Ziggler versus Kofi Kingston was good, with Ziggler retaining the IC title. CM Punk cut a promo on Chicago to turn himself heel, and then he was promptly destroyed by the Big Show. Poor CM Punk. One highlight was Daniel Bryan winning the U.S. title from The Miz. This was Daniel Bryan's first singles title in WWE. And then the main event was a 6-pack challenge. John Cena, Randy Orton, Edge, Sheamus, Wade Barrett, and Chris Jericho. Y2J was heading out of the company for a while to take one of his breaks. So he ended up getting eliminated right away from an RKO, literally like the first minute in the match. And everybody's just standing in the ring shocked that Jericho got eliminated so quick. And then you had all the other eliminations. Nexus coming out again to screw with John Cena, costing Cena. And then Randy Orton beat Sheamus to capture the WWE World title. More about the storyline with Nexus and Cena than the actual quality of the match. So overall, not much of a pay-per-view. And speaking of pay-per-views that were not that good, Hell in the Cell 2010, or as I like to call it, Heck in a Cell. You had, in my opinion, the best match of the show, the opening match, a triple threat submissions count anywhere match between Daniel Bryan, Miz, and John Morrison for the U.S. title. Lots of crowd brawling. Morrison at one point jumps up on top of the cell structure that was part of the set and leaped off onto the other 2 guys. And take a guess how Matt Striker reacted to this. If your guess is, oh, then you are correct. The crowd did chant, "That was awesome." And I note this because I think this was the first time that the fans chanted what would eventually become the common "This is awesome" chant. They were actually chanting, "That was awesome." You had Alex Riley coming out and trying to help out The Miz. Bryan threw Riley into a cameraman and then tapped out The Miz for the win. So Daniel Bryan looking strong here in his successful U.S. title defense. But of course he had Michael Cole insulting Bryan the whole time, calling him a nerd and all that stuff. You had Sheamus versus Randy Orton in a Hell in a Cell match, but I think that this was more of a steel steps match than a Hell in a Cell match. They were doing more stuff with the steel steps than they were with the cage. And every time they do something with the steel steps, you'd have Matt Striker with this, oh. Sheamus would work over the ribs of Randy Orton. Not much of a match in terms of carnage that you would come to expect from Hell in the Cell matches, at least the classic Hell in the Cell matches. Randy Orton won with an RKO on the steel steps. Surprise. After the match, Randy Orton got up on top of the cage and celebrated, so that was cool. But the match itself was average at best. You had Del Rio in his first pay-per-view appearance doing a promo with Edge. That would lead to Jack Swagger coming out and having a match with Edge. Basically a Raw segment. Nothing to it. John Cena versus Wade Barrett. If Cena lost the match, he would have to join Nexus. And Nexus was banned from ringside. Nexus did try to come out and get involved in some fashion, but the locker room came out and helped out John Cena. Then you had 2 unknowns at the time coming out to interfere. They would turn out to be Curtis Axel and Bray Wyatt before they became those characters. They would end up being new members of Nexus after this pay-per-view. It was very similar to the 2009 SummerSlam match between Cena and Orton, when you had Brett DiBiase, Ted DiBiase's brother, coming out and acting like a fan, costing Cena the match. Very similar finish. the fans were totally shocked at this. I mean, WWE was cutting to shots of these different fans, these little kids being really upset. The idea of John Cena having to join Nexus. It was kind of lame, actually, in my opinion at least. And then we had Undertaker and Kane. This was over 20 minutes of sheer boredom. Some of the Undertaker and Kane matches from the Attitude Era were not that exciting. And this was 10 years later in the PG era. It was very sad to watch at times. The crowd was dead for most of the match. The announcers seemed bored as hell. Kane hit a tombstone. Matt Striker reacted with a, you guessed it, oh! Then you had the referee getting knocked down. A second referee opened the cage to try and help out the referee. You had Paul Bearer trying to squeeze his way through the cage. And I say that in the most respectful way possible to the late, great Paul Bearer. But this was sad. Paul Bearer could barely move. He took forever to finally get into the ring. Kane tried to go after Paul Bearer. Undertaker made the save. The lights went out. And then all of a sudden, Paul Bearer blinded the Undertaker with the lighting from the urn. This was really lame. Very awkward. This just took way too long. And everything was so slow-paced. Kane ended up hitting the Undertaker with the urn to win the match. And the crowd was just dead for almost this entire thing. One of the worst WWE pay-per-view main events in history, in my opinion. I mean, this was really bad. Next up, we have Bragging Rights. Pretty forgettable pay-per-view. The commentary was not good on this show. By this point, Michael Cole was a full-fledged heel. And the problem here is that at times he would try to be a straight play-by-play man, but then do the heel color commentary, and doing both roles at the same time was quite ridiculous. You had Ziggler versus Daniel Bryan. Very good match. Lots of near falls. Crowd actually did a "This is awesome" chant, so this might have been the first one on a WWE pay-per-view. Lots of near falls, back and forth. Finally, Ziggler tapped out to the LeBell Lock. And Vicky Guerrero, her reaction at ringside, screaming and going crazy, that was great. Good match. You had John Cena, who was now part of Nexus, teaming up with David Otunga, and they ended up winning the tag team titles. Cena pretty much did all the work in this match, and afterwards David Otunga celebrated with both titles. John Cena gave him the AA and left with both titles. Undertaker versus Kane, buried alive match. Another boring match between these two, maybe a little bit better than Hell in a Cell. They hit each other with some very weak chair shots. Usual crowd brawling. It was alright. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't anything special. The crowd was dead again for this match. Undertaker sat up, and Matt Striker reacted to Undertaker sitting up with an "oh." Undertaker put on Hell's Gate to tap out Kane or pass him out, whatever. And at this point, Paul Bearer was trying to interfere. Undertaker went after Paul Bearer, and you had Nexus coming out and attacking Undertaker, beating the crap out of Undertaker, and Kane sent Undertaker into the pit, and then used his magical Kane powers to release the bulldozer and all the dirt that came down onto the Undertaker. And that was the end of the match. And afterwards, Undertaker's music played and his logo was projected on the tombstone, and that was the end of it. And it should be noted that there was never any follow-up to Nexus and Undertaker. Undertaker would come back several months later to set up his match with Triple H at WrestleMania 27, and there was no mention of Nexus again. Next up, we have the Raw vs. SmackDown match, the Bragging Rights match. The winning team between Raw and SmackDown gets the Bragging Rights trophy. This was different from the previous year's Bragging Rights match. This was an elimination match, Survivor Series style. And that's interesting because not only did I think that this was the best match on this pay-per-view, but I also thought this match was better than anything at the Survivor Series 2010 pay-per-view. This should have been at Survivor Series. It also reminded me of the 1995 Wild Card Survivor Series match, which I was always a big fan of that concept, where you have heels and faces having to work together on the same team. You had Del Rio and Mysterio having issues. Del Rio would end up attacking Rey Mysterio. Mysterio would be taken to the back. It would come down to Edge by himself on the SmackDown team against the 3 Raw guys. Rey Mysterio would make his return. Mysterio would get the hot tag. Good back and forth between Mysterio and CM Punk. You know, a little bit of a follow-up to their feud earlier in the year. Punk got pinned by Mysterio. And then there was one botch in this match. Mysterio went up for the splash off the ropes, but tripped and fell onto Ezekiel. And Ezekiel kicked out at 2, I guess, because it was a botch, but it was supposed to be a 3 count, I guess, and Ezekiel was still eliminated. The whole thing was a bit of a mess, but other than that, it was a good match. Alex Riley took the bullet for The Miz with the 619, but it wasn't enough. Edge was able to spear The Miz, and Edge and Rey Mysterio won for Team SmackDown and celebrated with the trophy. Main event for the WWE title was Randy Orton versus Wade Barrett with John Cena in the corner of Wade Barrett. Crowd was chanting "Fire Cena" right off the bat, but beyond that, the crowd was pretty dead for this match. John Cena really did nothing but stand there until the very end. There was a ref bump. Randy Orton ended up knocking Wade Barrett into John Cena, who was standing on the apron. Cena fell off the apron, and at this point, Nexus came out, attacked Randy Orton. John Cena ran in and attacked the Nexus members, his teammates in Nexus. But John Cena's defense was that he was trying to prevent Wade Barrett from getting DQ'd. Cena ended up hitting the AA on Barrett, so Barrett did win by DQ. And then Randy Orton hit an RKO on John Cena to end the match. And that was it. Pretty lame storyline and a flat finish to the pay-per-view, which really wasn't all that special beyond the bragging rights match. And for the final WWE pay-per-view of 2010, we have TLC, Tables, Ladders, and Chairs. Kofi Kingston versus Dolph Ziggler versus Jack Swagger for the IC title ladder match. Good match, but too short. You had Vicky Guerrero at one point trying to climb up the ladder to help her man, Dolph Ziggler. The finish was really bizarre. You had Kofi Kingston and Jack Swagger on top, both trying to grab the belt. The belt ended up falling to the ground, and I guess the idea was that Ziggler was supposed to grab the belt before it hit the ground, but he was a few seconds short, and the belt ended up falling on the ground, and then Ziggler grabbed it, and that was the end. The announcers were trying to say it was like football, where the person who catches the football first gets the victory or whatever. Basically, the idea was that the first person to gain possession of the title belt was the winner. It was kind of goofy, but I'll at least give WWE points on creativity. One of the highlights of this show was John Morrison versus Sheamus. The winner of this match, it was a ladder match with the winner getting a WWE title shot. The contract was on top. That was what they were going for. Really good match between these guys. They had John Morrison selling a leg injury for most of the match. They had a couple big moments where Sheamus was on top of a ladder. Morrison threw him off, and Sheamus went to the outside and went through a ladder that was set up on the outside like a bridge. Then you had Morrison trying to climb up the top, and Sheamus attempted to knock Morrison off the ladder. Morrison put his foot on the rope and used the momentum to not only get back into the center of the ring on top of the ladder, but managed to kick Sheamus right in the head in the process. And that was a really cool finish. Excellent finish in my opinion. John Morrison got the contract, won the match, and they made a huge deal out of this. Big post-match celebration. Probably the biggest post-match celebration you'll see for a guy not winning a championship. They made a really big deal out of this. Then you had The Miz in his first big WWE pay-per-view world title defense against Randy Orton. It was basically a gimmick match with the tables. Randy Orton put Alex Riley through a table, and then Miz attacked Randy Orton and then told the referee that he put Randy Orton through the table, and the referee, like a dumbass, believed him and rang for the bell. Then during the instant replay, the referee sees what happened and sees that Miz was a liar. What a shock there. And the match was restarted. And Michael Cole even brought up that there was no instant replay rule in the WWE. The whole thing was just really silly because usually the referee has to see what's going on before he can end the match. So for the referee to just take a wrestler's word for it is ridiculous in the first place. Then The Miz pushed Alex Riley into Randy Orton, who went through a table, and The Miz won the match. I guess because Miz pushed Riley and that caused Orton to go through the table, that counted as Miz putting Orton through the table. The whole thing was just very ridiculous, but whatever. I mean, it was entertaining to a degree. You had an awesome Fatal 4-Way TLC match. I thought that this was a really entertaining match. Rey Mysterio versus Alberto Del Rio versus Kane versus Edge. Lots of cool moments here. You had Ricardo trying to climb up, just like Vicky was earlier for Dolph Ziggler, trying to help Del Rio win the match. Del Rio ended up taking a huge bump off the top of the ladder, going through a table on the outside, and then Edge ended up spearing Kane off the apron through one of the tables. And then Edge climbed up the ladder and won what would turn out to be his last world title. I would definitely recommend checking out this match. Really well done, well booked, well paced match. Big filler segment here on this show with Cody Rhodes and the Big Show dressed up as Santa, basically to promote Knucklehead. The less said about this, the better. And then we had the main event of the show. To follow up the Fatal 4-Way TLC match for the world title, we had a chairs match. John Cena versus Nexus in the blow-off to the John Cena versus Nexus feud. The storyline during the show was that John Cena took out all the members of Nexus in a series of goofy backstage segments to eliminate everybody, so it would be Cena versus Wade Barrett one-on-one. And the final segment, you had Cena hitting Husky Harris, I was about to say Bray Wyatt, hitting Husky Harris with a steel chair, and one chair shot completely wiped out Husky Harris from being able to interfere in the main event. Whatever, the whole thing was very goofy. Much of this Cena versus Barrett feud was goofy. You had CM Punk on commentary, and really that was the most entertaining thing about this match, was Punk being on commentary. No diet soda, unfortunately. We did not get another occurrence of CM Punk's diet soda being spilled. And how I remember that 5 years later is something else. You had one spot in this match where Wade Barrett went for the steel steps. He set him up on the outside. John Cena went to the back and brought out a computer chair. He put Barrett on the computer chair and pushed Barrett down the ramp, and Barrett crashed into the steel steps. Entertaining spot, but once again, pretty goofy stuff. And for the end, we had John Cena doing the AA onto Wade Barrett on a bunch of chairs. During the match, we had the usual chair shot to the gut, chair shot to the back spot, because by this point the chair shots to the head were banned. After the match, John Cena decided he was going to finish off Wade Barrett once and for all. And how did he do this, you ask? He decided to put Wade Barrett under a platform, so that way Barrett would not get hurt by anything. And then John Cena would pull a chain and a bunch of steel chairs would fall onto the platform that was protecting Wade Barrett. This was the way John Cena was going to finish Wade Barrett once and for all. Really hokey stuff here. And that was the end of the pay-per-view, and that was the end of the John Cena versus Nexus feud. So that'll wrap it up for my thoughts on the WWE B pay-per-views from 2010. Very long video here today. Let me know what you thought, what your favorite moments from 2010 were, what matches you enjoyed, what matches you did not enjoy. Leave a comment and stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest in the world of wrestling.